She spoke fluent Russian before the mafia boss. Minutes later, he ordered, "Bring her to my office." The smell of old paper and bitter coffee grounds was the scent of Natalia Markovich's life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, and settled deep in her lungs. She worked at Midnight Reads, a small, struggling book cafe tucked away on a street where the streetlights were more often broken than lit. The neighborhood was a mosaic of decay and resilience, of brick facades crumbling onto sidewalks where families still pushed strollers. The cafe itself was cozy, a small island of warm light and mismatched armchairs. But Natalia, wiping down the espresso machine long after the 8 o'clock closing rush should have ended, knew its truth. The ledgers were written in red ink, and the owner, Barry, kept the lights dim to hide the water stains on the ceiling. Natalia was the quiet one, the polite one. She moved with an efficiency that made her almost invisible. Her dark hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, her gray sweater worn thin at the elbows. She smiled at customers, but the smile never quite reached her eyes. Her English was perfect, almost academic, a stark contrast to the worn-out sneakers she wore. Anyone paying attention could see she was overqualified to be steaming milk and shelving used paperbacks. But in this neighborhood, nobody paid that much attention. She kept her head down. She survived. That was the mantra, paycheck to paycheck, scraping together enough for the tiny, damp apartment she shared with 2 other women. But her quietness had its limits. "Sashko, you must finish your homework before you get the cookie," she said, her voice softening for the first time all day. A small boy with wide, serious eyes looked up from a tattered math book at a corner table. He was maybe 7 years old, his hair a pale blonde mop. He gave her a gap-toothed grin. His mother, Irina, sat across from him, her hands twisting a napkin in her lap, her gaze constantly flickering toward the door. Irina and Sashko were her regulars. They came in every afternoon at 4, sharing 1 cup of tea and a single pastry between them for 2 hours. They spoke Ukrainian in hushed tones, and Natalia understood the fear radiating from Irina like a cold draft. They were undocumented. They lived in the shadows, just as she did, though perhaps their shadows were deeper. Natalia was fiercely protective of them. She gave Sashko the day-old cookies for free and always let them slip out the back door if a police car cruised by too slowly. They were part of her small, fragile ecosystem. Tonight, that ecosystem was about to be shattered. "Natalia, thank God you're still here." Barry, the owner, burst through the front door, his face pale and sweating despite the autumn chill. "I need you to stay. Private party. Big tip. They said big tip." Natalia's stomach tightened. She hated the private parties. They meant men who drank too much and looked at her too long. "Barry, my shift ended an hour ago. Please," he begged, not meeting her eye. "These guys, they're not the kind you say no to. They booked the whole place. 9 o'clock until close. I'll give you 50% of the service charge. 50%. That would cover her share of the electricity bill." She nodded, her shoulders slumping. "Fine." The men arrived at 9:15. They did not look like the usual clientele. They wore expensive suits, tailored dark wool that cost more than her rent for 6 months. They smelled of rich cologne and expensive leather. They moved with a heavy, deliberate confidence. Their whispers hushed, their eyes scanning the room, the exits, the street. Natalia, clearing tables, caught the subtle bulk beneath their jackets, the unmistakable outline of weapons. Her ingrained politeness took over. She brought them espresso, whiskey, and plates of pastries they barely touched. She kept her eyes on the floor, her movements small and quiet. Irina and Sashko were still in their corner, trapped. They had tried to leave when the men arrived, but one of the men at the door, a thick-necked brute, had shaken his head, motioning for them to stay put. He didn't want anyone leaving. Natalia tried to catch Irina's eye, to signal them toward the back kitchen door, but it was too late. The men had spread out, taking every table. One of them, a man in a pinstripe suit with a face like a bulldog, was clearly drunk. He was louder than the others, his laughter grating. He spotted Sashko. "Hey," the man slurred, pushing back from his table. "What's this kid doing here? This is a private joint." He lurched toward their table. "What you writing, kid? Homework?" Irina stood up, her body trembling, trying to pull Sashko behind her. "Please, sir, we're just leaving." "The man," Vinny laughed. "Leaving? Nah, sit down, have a drink." He reached out, his thick, clumsy fingers closing around Sashko's thin upper arm. The boy froze, a tiny, silent gasp of terror. Irina cried out, a small, choked sound. Something inside Natalia snapped. The years of quiet, of keeping her head down, of surviving, it all evaporated. "Ne trogaj jego." Her voice cut through the smoke and low murmurs like breaking glass. It was not loud, but it was absolute. She spoke in fluent, sharp Russian, her accent perfect, cold and commanding. The entire cafe went silent. Vinny, the drunk man, froze. His eyes widened, confused. He looked from Natalia to the boy, his grip faltering. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Natalia stepped directly in front of Vinny, close enough to smell the sour whiskey on his breath. She looked him dead in the eye. "Ya skazala odpusti jego," I said. "Let him go." She placed her hand over his, her grip surprisingly strong, and deliberately peeled his fingers off Sashko's arm. She pulled the boy behind her, shielding him with her body. "On Rebanok," she said, her voice dangerously low. "He is a child. You will not touch him." Vinny stared, his drunken haze pierced by the sheer, unexpected authority radiating from the quiet waitress. He looked around for support, but his companions were watching, their faces grim. He'd made a scene. He'd drawn attention. He mumbled an apology in broken English and stumbled back to his chair. Natalia kept her eyes on him for 1 second longer before turning. Her hand was gentle on Sashko's back. "Idite domoy," she whispered to Irina, nodding toward the kitchen. "Go home, through the back, now." Irina grabbed her son's hand, tears streaming down her face, and fled without a word. The silence that followed was heavier, charged. Natalia could feel every eye in the room on her back. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. In the darkest corner booth, a man sat alone. He had not moved, had not spoken during the entire confrontation. He was tall, even sitting, with dark hair swept back from a strong forehead. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit and a white shirt. No tie. He was unnervingly calm, his hands resting on the table. He hadn't been drinking. He had just been watching. As she met his gaze, a slow, thin smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were a pale, piercing gray, and they saw everything. He spoke in the same language she had used. His Russian was flawless, cultured, with an edge she recognized from a life she had buried. "Eto bilo krabro." That was brave. Natalia's blood turned to ice. It was one thing to speak the language. It was another to be understood by a man like this. He looked away from her, switching to perfect, unaccented English. He nodded to the 2 men nearest him, the ones who looked like bodyguards. "Bring her to my office, tonight." Panic, cold and sharp, seized her throat. This was it. This was the mistake she had avoided for 5 years. One moment of stupid, reckless bravery, and she had exposed herself. The 2 men stood. Barry, her manager, rushed over, his hands flapping. "Sir, I'm sorry. She's my best employee. The man in the booth, the man everyone was clearly afraid of, raised one hand. Barry stopped talking. The man didn't even look at him. He simply slid a thick stack of $100 bills from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. For the trouble and for her time, Natalia looked at the exit. She could run. But where? These were not men you ran from. One of the bodyguards took her gently but firmly by the elbow. "Miss." She did not resist. She did not scream. She felt the familiar, paralyzing cold of helplessness settle over her. She allowed herself to be led out of the cafe, past her stunned manager and into the night. The car was a black sedan. So dark the streetlights seemed to slide off it. It was silent inside. The engine a low purr. The driver never looked at her. The other man sat beside him. She was alone in the back. Her hands clenched in her lap. her cheap apron still tied around her waist. They drove out of the decaying neighborhoods, away from the cracked pavement and boarded-up windows, and climbed the hills into the wealthy part of the city. They drove toward the glittering towers of glass and steel that overlooked the harbor. The car glided into a private underground garage. The man opened her door. They entered a silent elevator, all polished chrome and dark wood. He used a key, and the elevator ascended without stopping for what felt like an eternity. They emerged into a penthouse. The space was massive, minimalist, and sterile. The floors were black marble. The furniture was sparse and modern. One entire wall was glass, offering a breathtaking, dizzying view of the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of diamonds. The man led her to a set of large double doors and knocked once. "Vakoti," a voice called. "Come in." The bodyguard opened the door and gestured for her to enter. He did not follow. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving her alone with him. Constantine Costa Moretti was standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had taken off his suit jacket. The white shirt strained slightly against the muscles of his back and shoulders. He turned. He was even more intimidating here. In his own space, he studied her, his gray eyes analytical, stripping her bare. "Whiskey?" he offered, gesturing to the decanter on his massive, empty desk. "No, thank you." Her voice was a dry rasp. He took a sip of his own. "You have a good accent. St. Petersburg?" She had to force the lie past her lips. "A small town near the border. My grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother taught you how to command a room full of armed men. He was drunk. He was frightening a child." "He was Vinnie Molinaro," Costa corrected her, his voice quiet. "He isn't just drunk. He's stupid, but he's a dangerous kind of stupid, and he's one of mine." He walked toward his desk, but didn't sit. He perched on the edge, placing him slightly above her. "You are Natalia Markovich. You are 26 years old. You have a degree in comparative literature that you do not use. You work 60 hours a week for minimum wage. You are polite, you are quiet, and you are terrified." He paused, letting the words hang in the silent, expensive air. "But you were not terrified of Vinnie." He took another step closer. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You are terrified of me." She said nothing. Breathing was difficult. "Why?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't touched you." "You had me brought here." "I did." He smiled that thin, cold smile again. "I have an upcoming negotiation with some Russian contacts. They are difficult. They think they can cheat me because my regular translator is no longer available. They think I won't catch the nuance, the insults hidden in compliments." He circled her, slowly, like a predator inspecting a new curiosity in its territory. "But you will," he continued. "You caught Vinnie's intent instantly. You have poise, and you speak the language like a native, not just any native, an educated one." He stopped in front of her again. "I have a job for you, Natalia, a temporary one. You sit in a meeting, you listen, you tell me exactly what they are saying, not what they want me to hear, what they are saying." He named a salary for one night's work. It was more money than she made in an entire year at the cafe. "And protection," he added, as if it were an afterthought, "from men like Vinnie, from men like me. No strings attached." He paused, his eyes glinting. Yet, the fear in her chest was so profound it almost choked her. This was the world she had escaped. This was the life that had broken her. These men, with their quiet commands and easy violence, were the reason she hid in a book cafe. To accept his offer was to step back into the cage. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm. "No." Costa raised an eyebrow. He clearly was not a man who heard that word often. "No, no," she repeated, louder. She felt a hysterical bubble of adrenaline. "I want to go home. You can't keep me here. I did not do anything. You embarrassed one of my men. You showed a skill you shouldn't have, in a place you shouldn't have been. You did many things, Natalia. I want to leave." He studied her for a long, heavy moment. She expected him to yell, to threaten, to grab her. He did none of those things. He simply nodded. Very well. He gestured to the door. You can go. She stared, bewildered. It was not a trick. Just go? I'm not in the business of kidnapping waitresses, he said, his voice laced with faint amusement. I'm in the business of making offers. You declined. The car will take you home. She did not trust it. She backed away, her hand on the doorknob. His eyes followed her, but he did not move. She pulled the door open. Half expecting the bodyguards to be waiting, the hall was empty. She walked quickly, her sneakers squeaking on the marble. She did not run. She rode the elevator down, her body shaking so hard she had to lean against the wall. The same silent driver was waiting. He held the back door open for her. The ride home was silent. He dropped her at the corner of her street. She stumbled out of the car and ran the last block, fumbling for her keys, convinced someone was following her. She triple-locked her apartment door and leaned against it, sliding to the floor, finally letting the sobs of terror and relief escape. She slept for 3 hours, a fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep. The next evening, she went to work. She had to. Rent was due. She walked into the back room of Midnight Reads, her body aching with tension, expecting Barry to fire her. He wasn't there. She opened her locker to put her bag away. A thick, white envelope was sitting on the shelf. Her name, Natalia, was written on the front in elegant, strong, black script. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was full of cash, $100 bills, thousands of dollars, more than the salary he had offered. Tucked inside the stack was a small, heavy business card. There was no name, just a phone number, and beneath it, 2 words, written in the same confident hand, "You'll change your mind." Natalia did not spend the money. The thick white envelope felt like a brick in her bag, a weight of compromise she refused to accept. She went to work. She mopped the floors. She steamed milk. And she pretended the city had not shifted beneath her feet. She tried to return to normal, but there was no normal. The first time, she thought it was a coincidence. A man in a gray wool coat, standing across the street from her apartment building at 6 a.m. When she left for her shift, he was still there, reading a newspaper. When she came home 12 hours later, a different man, this one in a dark hoodie, was leaning against the bodega on her corner, smoking. He was there the next day, too. She started taking different routes. She would get off the bus 2 stops early and walk through a crowded market, her heart pounding, her keys clutched between her fingers. But she would still catch a glimpse, a flash of a dark hoodie in the reflection of a shop window, the sound of footsteps just a little too evenly paced behind her. Then, Irina and Sashko vanished. One day, they were at their regular table, Sashko painstakingly drawing a picture of a superhero. The next, they were gone. Natalia waited, her stomach clenching with every chime of the cafe's front bell. 4 o'clock came and went, then 5. By the 3rd day, she knew. She went to their building, a grim tenement 5 blocks away. The super, a wary man with stained overalls, told her he hadn't seen them. Their door was locked. Their mailbox was overflowing. They were gone, swallowed by the city, as if they had never existed. The fear that had been a low hum in her blood ratcheted up to a scream. She knew, with a certainty that made her sick. This was not a coincidence. The final violation happened on a Friday. She came home late, exhausted, her muscles aching from a double shift. She put her key in the lock and the door swung open. It was not locked. She froze. Silence spilled out from the dark apartment. Her first instinct was to run, but she had nowhere to go. She pushed the door open, her hand finding the light switch. The tiny apartment was destroyed, not with violence, but with a cold, methodical precision. The sofa cushions were sliced open. The few books she owned were torn from their spines. Her roommate's meager belongings were tossed across the floor. In her own room, her mattress was slit from end to end, the stuffing pulled out. Her clothes were piled in the center of the room. They had been looking for something. She backed away, stumbling into the kitchen, and she saw it, on the small, chipped formica table, precisely in the center, sat the white envelope Costa Moretti had given her. It was untouched. Beside it, her passport, which she kept hidden under a loose floorboard, was laid open. This was not a robbery. This was a message. They had torn her life apart and left the money to show her it was not what they wanted. They had found her passport to show her they knew exactly who she was. Rage, pure and cold, cut through the terror. He had done this. Costa. He had sent his men to follow her, to frighten away Irina, to tear her home apart, all to force her hand. She grabbed the envelope and the passport. She did not bother to pack. She walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, and onto the dark street. She hailed the first taxi she saw, her hands shaking so badly she could barely open the door. She still had the business card. She gave the driver the address. Costa's club was not the sterile penthouse. It was a high-end exclusive establishment called the Onyx Room, buried in the heart of the financial district. The facade was all black glass and velvet ropes. Two immense men in perfect black suits guarded the door. She tried to walk past them. One of them put an arm out, a solid wall of muscle. "Private club, miss." "I'm here to see Costa Moretti," she said, her voice shaking but hard. The man's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed. "Mr. Moretti isn't seeing anyone. He will see me." She pushed the white envelope against his chest. "Tell him Natalia is here. Tell him she's returning his gift." The guard looked at the envelope, then at her face, pale, furious, and streaked with the grime of her ruined apartment. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once to the other guard and spoke into a microphone on his wrist. She waited for 10 minutes, standing on the cold pavement, refusing to shiver, refusing to be intimidated. Finally, the guard nodded. "This way." He led her through the opulent, noisy club. It was all dark wood, mirrored ceilings, and expensive-looking people drinking brightly colored cocktails. The music was a low, heavy bass beat. He led her past the crowds, up a private flight of stairs, and to a glass-walled office that overlooked the entire club. Costa was inside, not alone. 2 men were with him, one of them the same pinstriped, drunken brute from the cafe, Vinny. The other was broad, dark, and had the still, dangerous energy of a coiled snake. Costa was seated behind a desk, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, just as he had been in the penthouse. He looked up as she entered. He did not look surprised. He smiled, that same thin, chilling smile. "Natalia, I was wondering when you would call." "You did this," she said, her voice trembling with accusation. She threw the envelope of cash onto his desk. It landed with a heavy, insulting thud. "You sent men to follow me. You broke into my apartment." Costa looked at the envelope, then back at her. He was completely, unnervingly calm. Vinny, however, looked furious. "Boss, this is the broad I told you about, showing no respect." "Vinny, be quiet," Costa said, his voice soft. Vinny shut his mouth instantly. Costa's gray eyes fixed on Natalia. "I did not send anyone to break into your apartment. You're lying. They left the money. They left my passport. They were sending a message from you." "It was a message, yes," Costa agreed, swirling the ice in his glass. "But not from me." He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. "I told you I would protect you. You refused, so now you are exposed. What did you think would happen? What are you talking about? You spoke fluent Russian in a room full of my men like Vinny here, who talk too much." He shot a cold glare at the pinstriped man. "But my men were not the only ones who noticed you that night. The party, it was a negotiation with a rival faction. They were at the next table. They saw you, they heard you. They saw me take an interest in you." He let the words sink in. "They see a smart, educated, Russian-speaking woman, and they see an asset. Or," he added, his voice dropping, "a liability, a loose end. They are the ones who have been following you. They are the ones who tossed your apartment, looking for leverage, looking for who you really are. They are the ones who frightened off your friends." Natalia's fury collapsed, replaced by a deep, sucking dread. He was telling the truth. The cold, methodical search, the displayed passport, it was a threat. It was an interrogation. "You are in danger, Natalia," he said, his voice flat. Not because of me, but because someone else noticed you, and right now, you are alone. They know where you live, they know where you work, and they know you have no one." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She sank into it, her legs weak. "I will offer you the job one more time," he said, returning to his desk. "Translator, the salary I named, and my protection. Absolute, unequivocal protection. They will not touch you again. They will not even look at you again." She looked at the money on his desk, then at her passport he had somehow retrieved, which he now slid out of his own jacket pocket and placed next to the cash. "How did you—" "They left it as a trophy. My men are more thorough." He had known. He had let her find the apartment, let her come to him in terror. "You knew," she whispered, horrified. "You let this happen." "I let you see the truth," he corrected her. "I cannot protect a ghost. You had to choose, stay in the light or stay in the shadows where they will find you." She had no choice. She had no home, no friends, no safety. She was a ghost, and the hunters were closing in. "I accept," she said, her voice hollow. Costa nodded once, as if this were the only possible outcome. "But I have terms," she said, finding a last thin strand of defiance. "I will be your translator. That is all. This is a job. You will not harm me. You will not touch me. And when the job is done, when your negotiations are finished, you will let me go. You will give me a new passport, new papers, and I will leave." Costa studied her, his expression unreadable. The broad, quiet man by the wall, the one who hadn't spoken, watched her with open suspicion. "You have my word," Costa said finally. "Marco," he nodded to the suspicious man, "take Miss Markovich to the estate. Get her a room, and double the guard. Our friends now know she's with me. They might get ambitious." The man. Marco stepped forward. "Boss, with respect. She's a risk. We don't know her. We know she's smart," Costa said, his eyes still on Natalia. "And we know she's in trouble. That makes her useful, and it makes her mine to protect." The estate was 20 miles outside the city, a fortress of gray stone and black iron gates hidden by a dense forest. It was beautiful, but it was a cage. Marco, Costa's enforcer and most trusted man, regarded her with undisguised contempt. He showed her to a large, sterile guest room and told her not to wander. The inner circle was small. There was Marco, the enforcer, Vinny, the fool. An older, sharp-eyed woman named Sophia, who ran the finances and looked at Natalia like she was a stain on the carpet. They ate dinner in a vast, silent dining room, Costa at the head of the table. Natalia sat in silence, eating food she could not taste. The meeting was 2 days later. It was held in the estate's library, a room paneled in dark wood, the air thick with the smell of old leather and Costa's cigar smoke. 4 men sat across the table. They were hard men, their suits expensive, their faces bearing the cold, flat expressions of the Vori from her past. Natalia sat at Costa's right hand. Her instructions were simple. Listen to everything. They spoke in Russian, their words polite, full of false pleasantries. They were offering Costa a new shipping route, a way to move his product up the coast, avoiding federal patrols. It was a generous offer, too generous. One of them, the leader, a man with pale blue eyes and a scar on his chin, smiled at Natalia. "Your new translator is much prettier than the last one. Costa, a lovely new asset." Costa smiled back. "She is very effective." Natalia listened. She listened to the way they conjugated their verbs. She listened to the slang they used, a specific regional dialect from the Black Sea, and she listened to the joke the leader made. "Be careful with this route," he said, "or your goods might end up baptized." It was a trap. Baptized was street slang for being seized, the goods dumped in the water, but he'd used a specific, obscure turn of phrase. He wasn't just warning of a risk, he was stating a fact. They were giving him a route they knew was compromised, a route that would lead Costa's men directly into a federal ambush. They were setting him up to be arrested, or worse. The pretty new asset comment, they were testing to see if Costa's focus was on her instead of the deal. Costa was about to agree. He was leaning forward, a look of satisfaction on his face. Natalia had to move. She couldn't speak, not in Russian. She deliberately knocked her glass of water, spilling it across the table, away from the papers. "Prostit," she gasped. "I'm so sorry, As Costa and the others stood back, she grabbed a napkin, under the guise of wiping the desk near Costa. She whispered in English, her voice frantic and low. "It's a trap. The route is a setup for the feds. They called it baptized. They're planning to baptize your men." Costa's body went completely still. His eyes, which had been on the mess, flicked to her. He saw the genuine panic in her face. He saw the certainty. He slowly sat back down. The Russians were watching, their smiles thin and annoyed by the interruption. Costa's entire demeanor changed. The friendly negotiator was gone. He leaned back in his chair and put his hands behind his head, his gray eyes turning to ice. "Gentlemen," he said in English, forcing them to strain for the meaning, "I appreciate the offer, but I think I will decline." The Russian's smiles vanished. "Decline?" the leader asked, his Russian suddenly sharp. "All pleasantries gone? I don't like getting my feet wet," Costa said. "The meeting is over. Marco will show you out." The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. The Russians stood, their faces dark with fury. The trap had failed. They knew. Somehow. He had been warned. Their eyes flicked to Natalia, and she felt a cold dread. They knew. They left, their threats veiled but clear. The library was silent for a full minute after they were gone. Marco stood by the door, his eyes on Natalia, his suspicion now mixed with a grudging respect. Costa poured 2 glasses of brandy from a decanter on the sideboard. He walked over to Natalia, who was still standing, her hands trembling. He handed her one of the glasses. "You did well," he said. It was the first time his voice had held any genuine warmth. He was looking at her differently. He was seeing her. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. She wandered downstairs and found Costa in the great room, standing before a massive fireplace where a low fire crackled. He heard her, turning as she entered. "Can't sleep." "No." She walked closer, drawn to the heat. She was still wearing the clothes she'd been given, a simple silk blouse and dark trousers. But she felt exposed. She took a sip of the brandy he'd left for her on the mantel. He was just watching her. His gaze was intense, analytical. It tracked from her eyes to the nervous way she held the glass, and then, for a split second, to her hairline. She instinctively raised a hand to a spot near her temple, where her hair usually hid the faint, silvery white line, a scar. It was one of many. He spoke, his voice so soft it was almost lost to the fire. "Someone hurt you." It was not a question. It was a statement. Natalia froze. The glass in her hand trembled. All the air left her lungs. The polite, quiet waitress, the sharp translator, both of them dissolved, leaving only the terrified girl who had run from Odessa. She said nothing. She couldn't. Costa didn't press. He didn't ask who, or when, or how. He looked back at the flames, his profile hard and unforgiving in the orange light. He didn't touch her. He didn't move from his spot, though he was very close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a solid, dangerous presence next to her. The air between them was tight, charged with everything unsaid. "I don't break women," he said to the fire. "I break men who do." She looked at him then, truly looked at him. He was a monster, a killer, a man who lived in the darkness she had tried so hard to escape. But in that moment, his quiet, brutal promise was the only thing in the world that felt safe. The chemistry was there, simmering beneath the surface, a dangerous, unspoken thing. They were both waiting. She was waiting to see if he was a different kind of monster. And he, she realized, was waiting for her to stop being afraid of him. Her life was no longer measured in coffee cups and closing shifts. It was measured in hushed meetings in Costa's library, in late-night drives in the back of a silent, armored sedan, and in the constant, low-level hum of danger. She was, in effect, working full-time for Constantine Moretti. Her role began as translator, but it bled into something more. She was a shadow at his side, a silent observer, and, increasingly, a barometer for the truth. He kept her with him, and she began to learn the anatomy of his empire. It was a creature of brutal contradictions. On a Tuesday, she sat in a sterile warehouse office overlooking a loading dock, the air smelling of diesel and bleach. She listened as Costa and Marco discussed pharmaceutical logistics. She translated slang for street-level distribution, profit margins of 500%, and territorial disputes that were settled with cold, clinical precision. She felt a chill as Costa, without raising his voice, ordered one of his captains to dissolve the partnership with a crew that had been skimming. She knew dissolve did not mean a handshake, but on Wednesday, she sat in the back of a soup kitchen in her old neighborhood, a kitchen funded entirely by a Moretti Family Foundation charity. She watched Costa hand the startled director a personal check for $50,000, his only comment being that the plumbing looked weak. On Thursday, she found herself in a small legal office, translating for an immigrant family, not unlike Irina and Sashko, who were facing deportation. Costa's lawyer, a man with a shark smile, used a series of obscure legal maneuvers, citing precedents she had never heard of, to tie the case up in bureaucratic knots for at least 3 years. "They get to stay," Costa said to her later, as if it were obvious. You help them," she said. Still processing the blatant legal manipulation, Costa took a long drag from a thin cigar, the smoke curling around his head. "The law is a tool. Natalia, it's a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to break a man's skull. I prefer to do both." She was shocked. Not just by the criminality, but by his mind. He was not a simple brute. He was intelligent, with a deep, cynical understanding of how the city truly worked, who to bribe, who to threaten, and who to protect. His ruthlessness was absolute. She saw him destroy a rival's trucking operation, bankrupting dozens of people, simply because the man had disrespected him at a restaurant. Yet, his moral code, though warped, was rigid. He did not deal in human trafficking. He protected the neighborhoods he controlled, ensuring a rough, violent sort of peace. He was a predator, but he was a predator who fiercely guarded his own territory from other, indiscriminate hunters, and he was slowly, cautiously, beginning to trust her. It started small. He would ask her opinion after a meeting. "That man, the one from the union, did you believe him?" She would hesitate, then answer truthfully, "No." His eyes kept moving to the door. He was afraid, but not of you, of someone else. Costa had nodded, a new, calculating look on his face. He kept her by his side, a permanent fixture. She was the quiet, dark-haired woman in the simple, expensive clothes he had provided, standing just behind his right shoulder. The simmering tension from that night by the fire never left. It was a wire pulled tight between them. He never touched her. He never spoke of it, but his eyes would linger on her for a second too long when she was pouring coffee, or his hand would brush hers as he passed her a document, sending a jolt through her skin. It was a dangerous, breathless state of existence, and she did not know how to leave it. The gala was meant to be his public face, a hospital fundraiser, held in the city's grandest ballroom. It was a sea of glittering dresses and tailored tuxedos. Costa looked agonizingly handsome he moved through the crowd with the easy grace of an aristocrat, shaking hands with the mayor, smiling at judges, charming the wives of bankers. Natalia, in a simple dark blue gown that had cost more than she used to make in 6 months, felt like a fraud. She stayed close, clutching a small evening bag, her face a mask of polite neutrality. "You look beautiful," he murmured to her at one point, his voice low as he handed her a glass of champagne. She flinched, startled by the direct compliment. "It's a beautiful dress." "It's a dress," he corrected, his gray eyes pinning her. "You are beautiful." She looked away, her cheeks burning, not from a blush, but from the intensity of his gaze. She saw Marco standing by the exit, his eyes sweeping the room, forever vigilant. They left just after 11. The air outside was cold, the city noise muted. They slid into the back of the black sedan. Marco was in the passenger seat, the driver a quiet man named Sal. "A successful night, boss," Marco said, as the car pulled into the sparse late-night traffic. "The mayor is a fool," Costa said, loosening his black tie. "He'll endorse the new zoning for the port. He thinks it's for luxury condos." It was for laundering. Natalia knew. She was looking out the window, at the blur of lights. When the world exploded, it was not a sound, at first, but a force. An immense, violent impact slammed into the side of the car, throwing her sideways, her head cracking against the armored window. The sedan spun, tires screaming, metal shrieking against metal. Another impact, from behind, a pit maneuver. The car was a trap. She heard a sound, a rapid, muffled thwack, thwack, thwack. It was not the sound of a movie. It was the sound of heavy-caliber rounds punching into the car's body. Panic, absolute and suffocating, seized her. She was frozen. She couldn't breathe. Her past, the violence she had run from, it was all here, in the dark. Spinning car. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. "Costa!" Marco yelled from the front. Costa did not reach for a weapon. He did not look out the window. His only movement was for her. He lunged across the seat in the fraction of a second before the side window spider-webbed, shattering but not breaking. He wrapped one arm around her waist, the other over her head, and pulled her down. He shielded her body with his own. She was crushed beneath his weight, her face buried in the expensive wool of his tuxedo jacket. She smelled his cologne, gunpowder, and the metallic scent of fear. The car was still moving, Sal wrestling with the wheel as another vehicle, a heavy black truck, repeatedly rammed them toward the bridge abutment. "Get us out, Sal!" Marco was shouting, and now there was the sound of return fire from the front seat. Natalia was shaking, a primal, uncontrollable tremor. She was back in Odessa. She was helpless. "Hold on." Costa's voice was a low growl in her ear, his breath hot. He was heavy, solid, a human shield. The car gave one final bone-jarring lurch, spun in a full circle, and then Sal found traction. The engine roared, and they rocketed forward, swerving through an intersection, the sound of the truck's engine and the gunfire fading behind them. They didn't speak. Sal drove for 20 minutes, his route a dizzying series of turns and back alleys, until he pulled into a dark, underground concrete garage. The door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them in silence. "We're clear," Marco said, his voice tight. Costa did not move for a long moment. He just breathed, his chest rising and falling against her back. Then slowly, he pushed himself off her. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. She couldn't answer. She tried to sit up, but the terror had broken her. The adrenaline fled, leaving a void that was filled instantly with racking, hysterical sobs. She curled into a ball on the seat, her hands over her face, the sounds tearing from her throat. It was not just for the attack. It was for her father, for her escape, for Irina, for the last 5 years of hiding. "Natalia." Costa's voice was sharp, but she couldn't stop. "Get her inside," he ordered. He opened the door and lifted her out as if she weighed nothing. He carried her through a steel door into a small, windowless apartment, a safe house. It was furnished with a couch, a table, and nothing else. He set her on the couch. "Marco, Sal, get a new car. Sweep the perimeter. Find out who?" Costa commanded. The men vanished. He was alone with her. She was still shaking, her teeth chattering, her breath hitching. He disappeared for a second and returned with a glass of water. He knelt in front of her. "Drink," he said. It was an order. Her hands were trembling too hard to take it. He sighed, a sound of deep frustration, and put the glass down. He did not comfort her with words. He reached out and, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for him, he brushed the hair from her face. His thumb moved to her cheek, wiping away the tears. His touch was rough, his skin calloused, but it was steady. "You're safe," he said, his voice flat. She looked at him, her vision blurry. He was alive. He was here. He had covered her. He saw the tiny fragments of glass glittering in her hair from the shattered window. He began to pick them out, one by one, his movements careful, almost clinical. He took her hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists, and uncurled her fingers, holding them firmly in his own. His hands were warm and strong. The simple, grounding touch broke her. She lunged at him. It was not a seduction. It was a desperate, primal need to affirm she was alive. She grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him toward her, and crashed her mouth against his. It was a clumsy, desperate collision. Her teeth hit his. She kissed him with all the fear and panic and desperate relief that was choking her. For a second, Costa was completely still, shocked by her sudden violence. Then, with a low groan, he responded. His mouth claimed hers. It was not gentle. It was a kiss of possession, of anger, of surviving death. His hand moved from her face, tangling in her hair, holding her head steady as he deepened the kiss. It was raw, and it was passionate, and it was exactly what she needed. She tasted the faint trace of champagne and whiskey on his tongue, felt the scrape of his stubble against her skin. She clung to him, her body still shaking, but for a different reason now. He kissed her like he was staking a claim, branding her, his other arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her tight against his hard chest. The air in the room was electric, the shared trauma igniting the tension that had simmered for weeks. And then, just as suddenly, he stopped. He gripped her shoulders and pushed her back, not roughly but with an undeniable finality. She stared at him, bewildered. Her lips swollen, her breath coming in gasps. His own breathing was heavy. His gray eyes were dark, almost black, with a desire that terrified and thrilled her. His knuckles were white where he gripped her. "Not when you're scared," he said, his voice a harsh rasp. He stood up, turning his back to her, and ran a hand through his hair. He was putting a wall back up, one she had just shattered. He had wanted her. She knew that, but he had refused to take her when she was vulnerable. He had refused to be the monster she expected. They sat in the sterile safe house for the rest of the night, not speaking. He took the single chair. She stayed on the couch, watching him. The gray morning light finally filtered through the garage door. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only exhaustion and a strange, terrible clarity. He had saved her, and he had respected her. He had earned the truth. "My father?" she said, her voice sounding loud in the concrete room. Costa turned, his expression wary. "My father was a fixer," she said, the words spilling out, dry and emotionless. "For the Bratva in Odessa, the Russian mafia. He wasn't important, but he was useful." She stared at her hands as she spoke. "When I was 19, they made an alliance with another family. Part of the deal was me, an arranged marriage to the boss's son, a man who liked to hurt things. I refused." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "My father, he enforced the agreement, or he tried." She touched the faint scar at her temple. "When they realized I was too broken to be a good wife, they smuggled me here. Damaged goods. I ran from their handlers in New York. I've been running ever since." Costa listened. He did not move. His face was carved from stone, his expression utterly unreadable, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. Once. He was silent for a full minute after she finished. The only sound was the hum of a distant ventilation fan. He walked over to her. He did not kneel this time. He stood over her, a dark, imposing shadow. He looked down at her, and his gray eyes were filled with a cold, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. He spoke, his voice quiet, but it was an oath. "They'll never touch you again." He turned away from her and pulled out his phone. She watched him, a new kind of fear dawning. She'd been afraid of the men from her past. Now, she was afraid for them. "Marco," he said into the phone, "double the security, on her, always. I want 2 men on her, eyes on, 24 hours a day." He paused, then continued, "And get me everything we have on the Odessa Bratva, everyone tied to the Volkov family. I want names, I want holdings, I want to know where they sleep." He hung up. He started making more calls. He was a general, preparing for war, and Natalia Markovich, the quiet waitress, realized she had just given him the map. War was not declared with trumpets. It was declared in quiet phone calls, in encrypted messages, and in the sudden, violent silence of Costa's enemies after that day in the safe house. Natalia's world shrank to the size of the estate, but the ripples of Costa's promise spread across continents. He began to dismantle her past, piece by brutal piece. She saw it first in the financial news, a shipping consortium based in Odessa, with known ties to the Volkov family, was suddenly under federal investigation. Its assets were frozen. Its stock plummeted to zero. Then, a minor politician in that same city, a man who had facilitated her father's business, was arrested on corruption charges. The evidence, the reports said, was anonymous and undeniable, one by one. The men who had touched her, the men who had arranged her sale, the men who had stood by and watched, began to fall. One was in a car accident in Berlin. Another simply vanished from his favorite restaurant in Brighton Beach. Natalia watched this unfold from the gilded cage of Costa's library. She felt a cold, sickening horror. This was the violence she had fled, now unleashed in her name. She saw the ruthlessness she had only glimpsed before, now laid bare. He was a monster, efficient and absolute, but a deeper, more complicated emotion warred with the horror. She was stunned by his devotion. No one had ever protected her. No one had ever valued her enough to stand between her and the world. Costa was not just standing there. He was burning the world down for her. She was terrified of what he was doing, and, in a secret, trembling part of her heart, she was undone by why he was doing it. Costa himself was unchanged. He took his calls, read his reports, and sat across from her at dinner, asking if she liked the food. He never spoke of the men he was destroying. He simply continued his work, a silent, methodical campaign of eradication. But his war had a cost. His focus was diverted, his resources stretched, and in any empire, there are always rats in the shadows. Marco was the first to sense it. He became a ghost, his paranoia a palpable static in the house. He vetted the staff again, checked the security feeds, and argued with Costa in low, urgent tones. "You're exposed, boss," Marco insisted, his voice tight. "This war? It's personal. It's making you sloppy. They know you have a weakness." "She is not a weakness." Costa's voice was deadly quiet. "She is a priority. Find the leak." The leak was Vinnie Molinaro. Resentful of Natalia's influence, humiliated from their first encounter at the cafe, and deep in gambling debt. He was an easy target. A single call from a Volkov representative was all it took. He didn't know much, but he knew who cleaned the guest wing. He knew the housekeeper, a young woman with a family back home, was vulnerable. A little money for Vinny, a significant threat to the housekeeper's family, and the betrayal was set. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Costa was downtown, locked in a meeting with his lawyers. Marco was at the gate, supervising a new security installation. Natalia was in her room, reading. The housekeeper she had come to trust, the one who always smiled and brought her tea, knocked gently. "Miss Natalia, I brought you some chamomile? You seem so tired." Natalia smiled, taking the cup. "Thank you. Maria, that's very kind." She drank it. The tea was warm, sweetened with honey. She felt a wave of gratitude for the small, normal kindness. The book in her lap blurred, the room tilted, the edges of her vision softening. A profound, heavy weariness pulled her down. She thought, vaguely, that she was just exhausted. She managed to stand, to make it to the bed, before a black, chemical fog enveloped her. She woke to the smell of rust and damp concrete. Her head was pounding, her mouth thick and dry. She was on a cold, filthy mattress. The room was dark, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from a high ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. She was not in the estate. She was not safe. "Ah, Spiashchaya Krasavica," the sleeping beauty. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a European suit. His blonde hair slicked back. His face was handsome, but his eyes were the color of ice. She knew him. The recognition was a physical blow, stealing what little breath she had. Dmitry Volkov, her fiancé. "You have caused me so much trouble, Natalia," he said, circling the mattress. He spoke in Russian, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that made her skin crawl. "My father is inconvenienced. Our associates are disappearing, all because my property decided to run." "I am not your property," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Dmitri laughed, a short, sharp sound. You were given to me. My father paid your father a great deal for you. You are a disobedient, broken thing, but you are still mine." He crouched in front of her. He was too close. He reached out, his gloved hand tracing the scar at her temple. She flinched, pulling away, but there was nowhere to go. "He tried to fix you," Dmitri mused. "My future father-in-law, a clumsy man. He should have just killed you." He stood up, smoothing his suit. "But this is a fortunate turn. This pazzo. This Italian pig you found. He cares for you. He's tearing down my family's work for you, which means you are now the perfect bait." He smiled. "He will come for you, and when he does, he will die. And then I will take you home. We will have the wedding. After all, I will enjoy teaching you your place." The sound came from outside the room, not a knock, not a shout. It was the sound of a heavy steel door being torn from its hinges. It was followed by a single, deafening gunshot, then another, then a spray of automatic fire, answered by the heavier, more disciplined reports of Marco's team. Dimitri's smile vanished. He spun. Pulling a pistol from his jacket, he grabbed Natalia by the hair, dragging her off the mattress and pulling her up to stand in front of him, the cold metal of the gun barrel pressing hard against her temple. "Get in here, Moretti!" Dimitri screamed in English. "Come and see your prize!" The gunfire outside stopped. The silence was absolute. Then, the door to the room kicked open, slamming against the concrete wall. Costa stood in the doorway. He was not wearing a jacket. His white shirt was splattered with blood that was not his. He held a pistol in his right hand, steady, pointed at the floor. He was alone. His eyes were not gray. They were black pits of rage. He looked at Natalia, at her face, at the gun to her head. Then he looked at Dimitri. "Let her go." Costa's voice was not human. It was a low, vibrational growl. "Drop the gun, Suka," Dimitri hissed, his arm tightening around Natalia's throat. "Or I will paint the wall with her brain." "You touch her," Costa said, taking one slow step into the room. "And there is no hell deep enough to hide you." "I said drop it." Costa did. He opened his hand and let the pistol clatter to the concrete floor. He raised his hand slowly to shoulder height. "She's not part of this. This is between us. Let her go." Dimitri laughed, high and unsteady. "You are a fool. You traded your life for her." He tightened his grip, and Natalia gasped, her vision starting to dim. That was the mistake. In the second that Dimitri's attention shifted, Costa moved. He was not a man. He was a predator. He closed the 10-foot distance in 2 bounds. He did not go for the gun. He struck Dimitri's wrist with the blade of his hand, a sharp, brutal crack of bone. The pistol flew from Dimitri's numb fingers at the same time. Costa's other arm wrapped around Natalia's waist, pulling her out of the way, spinning her behind him as he slammed his own body into Dimitri's. It was not a fight, it was an execution. Costa's hands, the hands that had gently brushed glass from her hair, the hands that had held hers in the safe house, closed around Dimitri's throat. He lifted the taller man off his feet and slammed him against the concrete wall. Dimitri's feet kicked uselessly. He clawed at Costa's wrists, his eyes wide and bulging with terror. "You don't touch her," Costa snarled, each word punctuated by another sickening impact as he slammed Dimitri's head against the wall. Natalia was on the floor, gasping for air, watching in frozen, abject horror. This was the man who had promised to break the men who hurt her. He was keeping his promise. He held Dimitri there until the kicking stopped, until the man's hands fell to his sides. He held him for 10 seconds after that. Then he let him drop. Dmitri Volkov crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, his neck at an unnatural angle. Costa stood over the body, his chest heaving. He was covered in sweat, his shirt torn. He did not look at the man he had just killed. He turned to Natalia. She saw the monster, blood spattered and breathing hard, and she saw the man who had come through a building of gunfire for her. He took a step. Natalia. The room spun. The face of the man who had saved her blurred with the face of the man who had just killed. The concrete floor rushed up to meet her. She collapsed into the darkness. She woke up in a bed she did not recognize. The sheets were clean, high-thread count linen. The room was vast, minimalist, and one entire wall was a window overlooking the city lights, the penthouse. She was clean. She was in a simple silk nightgown. There was a glass of water on the nightstand. Costa was sitting in a low armchair in the corner of the room, near the window. He was not sleeping. He was just watching her. He was clean, too. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark pants. His hands were resting on his knees. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. "You're safe," he said. His voice was raw. She sat up, the sheet pooling in her lap. She was not afraid of him, not anymore. She was just tired. "How long?" "A full day. You were in shock." She looked at him, the man who had killed for her, the man who had sat a vigil in her room for 24 hours. "Dimitri said I was property." Costa's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "He said I was his. My father said I was his. All my life, I have been someone's property." She met his intense gaze. "I can't do this. Costa, I can't be this. This prize. I can't live in your beautiful cage, waiting for the next person to come and claim me. I can't do this unless I feel free." He was silent for a long time. He just looked at her, and she had no idea what he was thinking. Finally. He stood up and walked to a desk in the corner. He opened a drawer. He pulled out 2 items and walked back to her bed. He placed them on the nightstand next to the water. One was a set of keys. "This penthouse. It's yours. It's not the estate. It's not my fortress. It's in your name, legally. No one can enter but you." The other was a passport, a new one, Canadian. In it, her picture. The name was one she did not recognize. "It's real," he said. "Good for 10 years. There is an account tied to it with enough money to go anywhere, to be anyone. You can walk out that door right now, and no one will stop you. Not me, not my men. You are free." She looked at the keys. She looked at the passport. Her freedom, everything she had ever wanted, handed to her by the most dangerous man she had ever met. She looked up at him. He stood there, vulnerable, waiting. He had just given her the only weapon that could truly destroy him, the choice to leave. She did not pick up the passport. She did not pick up the keys. She held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. His fingers were warm, his grip sure. She pulled him gently, urging him to sit on the edge of the bed. He did, his body tense, as if he were afraid to break her. "You're wrong," she whispered, his brow furrowed. "About what?" "You're not a monster. You're just mine." She leaned in, and this time, there was no fear. There was no desperation. There was only choice. She kissed him, slowly, softly. It was a kiss of gratitude, of understanding, of acceptance. He shuddered, a deep tremor running through him. He did not kiss her back, not at first. He just let her kiss him. His eyes closed. Then, his hand came up, not to her hair, but to her face. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. His touch reverent. He kissed her back. A slow, deep kiss that held all the unspoken words, all the violence, all the protection. "Natalia." He breathed against her lips, his voice thick. She drew back, just enough to look at him. She saw the man, not the boss. She saw the scars on him, the ones on his soul that matched hers. She began to unbutton the top button of his shirt. He watched her, his eyes dark, questioning. She undid the next button. Her fingers brushed the warm skin of his chest. He stopped her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Taimoya," he murmured, his voice a low, rough rasp. He spoke in Russian, the language of her past, but he made it the language of her future. "Tolko yesli ti sama etogo kochesh." "You're mine, only if you choose to be." She looked him in the eye, her choice absolute, made in the face of all the violence and all the devotion. She brought his hand to her lips, kissing his knuckles, the ones that had saved her. "I choose you," she answered. Constantine Moretti had changed, and the city knew it. The whispers started in the back rooms of social clubs and spread to the street corners. The boss had gone soft. He was spending his nights in the penthouse, not at his clubs. He was seen with a woman, a quiet, dark-haired shadow who never left his side. He was consolidating, yes, but he was also cleaning. He'd shut down 2 of his oldest rackets, operations he deemed too dirty, and was pouring money into legitimate real estate. His rivals, the old guard who saw tradition as power, smelled blood in the water. They saw a lion in love, and to them that was a lion with a leash. The call for a peace summit of the 5 families was inevitable. It was proposed by the Thierry family, a group Costa had always distrusted, as a way to re-establish territories and ensure a peaceful spring. Costa saw it as a performance. "We go. We drink their bad wine. We lie to each other and we go home," and he told Natalia, scanning the invitation in his office. "It is a show of strength. We must attend." "You don't trust them," she said. It was not a question. "I trust no one but you and Marco," he said, tossing the heavy cardstock invitation onto his desk. "But to refuse is to admit the rumors are true, that I am weak, that I am afraid." The summit was scheduled for 3 weeks out. The preparations were meticulous. Marco quadrupled the security reviews, sweeping the chosen location, a neutral hotel ballroom, for any possible threat. Natalia, meanwhile, had become the gatekeeper to Costa's life. She reviewed his correspondence, his financial reports, his logistical manifests. She had a mind for patterns, a skill honed by years of surviving in the shadows. It was late, a week before the summit, when she found it. Costa was asleep. She was in his office, reviewing a stack of shipping reports from a new import-export business he was building. He had glanced at them earlier and dismissed them. Just customs forms, Moya Zvezda, nothing. But something bothered her. A manifest for a shipment of Italian olive oil. The container numbers were listed, followed by their weight, but one container's numbers were off. It was a sequence, not a random assignment. She looked closer, her blood running cold. It was not a shipping code. It was a date and a time. She cross-referenced it with other manifests from the Thierry-controlled ports, more codes, coordinates, a list of inspectors. It was a coded message, hidden in the mundane, detailing a full-scale betrayal. The list of inspectors was a hit team. The date and time were not for the olive oil shipment. They were for the summit. They were planning to walk in, under the flag of peace, and execute Costa and his entire inner circle. She ran to the bedroom. Costa was awake instantly. The predator in him surfacing before his eyes were fully open. "What is it?" She spread the papers on the bed. "It's the summit. It's a trap. Look." Her finger traced the coded numbers. "The Thierry family. They're working with the Gallows. They're bringing a team. They plan to kill you all." Costa studied the documents, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He saw it. She was right. He was silent for a full minute. "I'll cancel," he said, his voice flat. "No," Natalia said, surprising them both. He looked at her. "They plan to murder me. And you say no? If you cancel," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "you prove you are weak. You prove the rumors are true. They will just find another way, a bloodier way. You will be hunted." "So what do you suggest, Natalia?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "That I walk in and let them shoot me? You said it yourself. You have to show strength, so show them. They want a war? You give them one. But you give it to them on your terms." He hesitated. For the first time, she saw true conflict in him. To cancel was weakness. To go was suicide. He was trapped. She gripped his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Listen to me. You are the smartest man in this city. You are the strongest. But this pride, this need to show them you are not afraid, it will kill you." She met his gaze, her own fierce and unwavering. "Power means nothing if you are dead." His expression shifted. The hesitation vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating focus she had seen in the safe house, the focus she had seen in the warehouse where Dmitri died. He trusted her. Completely. He kissed her, hard and brief. "You are right." He picked up his phone. "Marco, wake everyone. The summit is happening. Tonight." He did not cancel. He called the summit early. The message went out to the families at 4 a.m. An emergency, a security breach at the hotel. The summit was moved. The new location was an abandoned cathedral on the industrial side of the river, a massive, crumbling stone structure that Costa's family had owned for 50 years. It was a trap. The families arrived just before dawn, their cars gliding into the fog-shrouded courtyard. They were furious at the change, but they came. To refuse Costa's emergency summons would be a sign of their own weakness. The heads of the 5 families and their top enforcers met in the cavernous nave, the air cold and smelling of damp stone and candle wax. Costa stood at the altar, Natalia at his side. Marco was by the main door, his eyes dark. Costa's men were not visible. They were in the choir loft, on the scaffolding in the dome, hidden in the confessionals. "My apologies for the dramatic change in venue," Costa began, his voice echoing in the vast space. "But I received a credible threat. It seems someone has a problem with peace." The Thierry and Gallo bosses exchanged a nervous, predatory glance. They thought he was making an excuse. They thought he was scared. "Perhaps the threat is from within." "Costa," Thierry said, his voice oily. He reached inside his jacket. "You're right," Costa said. "It is." That was the signal. Marco slammed the heavy oak doors shut, the boom echoing like a cannon shot. The Thierry and Gallo men pulled their weapons, but Costa's men opened fire first. The cathedral erupted in a deafening roar of gunfire. It was not a chaotic firefight. It was a precise, brutal, one-sided extermination. Gunfire rained down from the choir loft. Men who had been praying for Costa's death were met with a divine, violent judgment. Costa did not move from the altar. He pushed Natalia behind him, shielding her as he drew his own weapon and fired 2 calm, measured shots, ending the Gallo boss's life. It was over in less than 90 seconds. The Thierry and Gallo families were eliminated. The other 2 family bosses, who had cowered behind the pews, were pale and shaking. Costa had consolidated his power in one bloody morning, but the victory was not clean. As the smoke cleared, Costa looked to the door. "Marco?" Marco was slumped against the wall, his hand pressed to his chest. He had taken 3 rounds meant for the men by the door. "Boss," Marco choked out, a bloody smile on his face. "Told you. They were sloppy." He slid to the floor. Costa rushed to him, but it was too late. His most loyal man, his oldest friend, was gone. Natalia felt a cold sickness. The violence was overwhelming. She backed away from the altar, stumbling toward a side exit, needing air. She pushed open a small door and found herself on a side street. Just as the sun was beginning to rise, a woman was walking her child to a bus stop. They were laughing. One of the Thierry gunmen, who had only been wounded, burst from the same door behind Natalia. He saw her, saw Costa's woman. He raised his pistol. Natalia saw the gun. But she also saw the child, not 10 feet away, frozen in terror, directly in the line of fire. She did not think. She ran, not away from the gun, but toward the child. She shoved the little girl and her mother to the pavement, covering the child with her own body. She heard the gun fire, the sound flat and ugly in the morning air. She heard a bullet sing past her ear, striking the brick wall just where her head had been. Before the gunman could fire again, a shot from the doorway ended him. Costa stood there, his gun smoking, his face a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. He looked at the bodies in the church, at Marco, and now at Natalia, who was trembling on the ground, shielding a screaming stranger. The aftermath was silent. Costa sat in his penthouse office, the sun now high, the city moving below as if the world had not just been remade. Natalia was sitting on the sofa, a blanket around her shoulders. She had a long, shallow graze on her upper arm where the bullet had nearly found her. Costa looked at his hands, the hands that had just ordered the deaths of a dozen men. "I'm done," he said, his voice hollow. She looked up. "Done?" The game. He gestured to the city. I consolidated power. I am the king. And for what? Marco is dead. You were almost shot, saving a child because of a war I started. He stood and walked to the window, staring down. I wanted to clean things up, but you can't. You can't clean blood. You can only paint over it. I'm done painting. He turned to her, his eyes clear and resolved. I want something new, something legal, something clean, something that doesn't put you in the line of fire. Natalia knew he meant it. She saw the exhaustion in him, the cost of the crown. She had helped him win his war. Now, she would help him find his peace. She stood and walked to him, taking his hand. Then we burn it. Burn it? You can't just walk away. Costa, they won't let you. But you have something they want, something everyone wants. She thought of her past, of the men who had hurt her, the men he had destroyed. The Volkov family, the Russians. You cut off the head, but the body is still moving. They're traffickers. They move women, Costa, like they tried to move me. His hand tightened on hers. You have all the data from your war, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The shipping lanes, the contacts, the bank accounts. You can't give it to the local police, but you can give it to someone bigger. The Federals, he breathed. They'd arrest me on the spot. Not if you have a mediator, Natalia said. Not if you're offering them the biggest trafficking bust on the East Coast. You offer them the Russians, all of them, in exchange for immunity. It was a breathtaking gamble. It was an admission of defeat and a master stroke of power, all at once. Costa looked at her, a slow, dawning respect in his eyes that went beyond love, beyond passion. He saw his partner. Find him, Costa said. Find the mediator. 2 days later, they sat in a sterile conference room in a federal building. It was just Natalia, Costa, and one man, the mediator. He was older, with tired eyes and a cheap suit. You're Constantine Moretti, the man said, stating the obvious. I am, Costa said, and I'm here to offer you a gift, the entire Russian-American sex trafficking network, names, routes, bank accounts, everything. The mediator leaned forward, his tiredness gone. In exchange for what? Full immunity, for me, for her, a clean slate. The Department of Justice doesn't just hand out clean slates to men like you. Then you don't get the traffickers, Costa said, leaning back. You get a few street-level runners. I'm offering you the head. The men who buy politicians, the men who own judges. I'm offering you the men who hurt her. He nodded to Natalia. The mediator looked at her, then back at Costa. He saw the truth. I can't promise full immunity, the mediator said, but for this? For the Volkov network? I can promise to negotiate. Partial immunity, witness protection, a new life, but you'll have to give us everything and you'll have to testify. Costa looked at Natalia. She nodded once. We'll take it. Costa said, dismantling an empire is not a clean process. It is a butchering. Costa learned this in the weeks that followed his deal with the Federals. His authority, once absolute, was now seen as a betrayal. He sat in the main office of the estate, the one he was already in the process of selling. Across from him sat his last 3 loyal captains. These were men who had survived the cathedral. Men whose families had served the Morettis for 2 generations. You're selling the Onyx Room, one of them, a heavy-set man named Paulie, said. His voice was flat, disbelieving. You're dissolving the transport lines. The business is changing, Costa said, his voice quiet. He looked at the men. He saw their confusion, their anger. He had been their king, and he had just abdicated. The old way is over. The Federals are watching. The deal is in place. We are moving everything into legitimate properties. Legitimate properties? A younger captain, Rocco, scoffed. Rocco had been Marco's protege. His eyes were full of a hot, bitter grief. We're not accountants, Costa. We're family. Marco died protecting that family, and you're... What? You're turning us into real estate agents? Marco died protecting me, Costa corrected him, his voice hardening. He died so I could live. This. He gestured to the ledgers. The for sale contracts. Is how I'm choosing to do it. It's the woman, Paulie said, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. She's changed you. Yes, Costa said without hesitation. She has. The old way is done. I'm offering you a new one. It's clean. It's safe. Your children won't have to look over their shoulders. Take it or leave it. Polly and the other captain, old and tired, eventually nodded. They would take the buyout. They would manage the new properties. But Rocco stood. He died for nothing. Rocco whispered, his voice shaking. You're spitting on his grave. You're not a boss. You're just her puppet. He turned and walked out. The slam of the heavy oak door echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. That same afternoon, Natalia met with the federal mediator, Agent Klein. They sat in the sterile conference room, Costa conspicuously absent. He's upholding his end, Klein said, shuffling papers. The data he's provided it's a game changer. The Volkov network is collapsing. We're rolling up assets from here to Berlin. That was the agreement, Natalia said simply. Yes, but now we have to talk about the blowback and about you. Klein leaned forward, his tired eyes trying to convey sincerity. When this goes public, every man Costa ever crossed, every Russian who isn't in a cell will be coming for him. And they'll come for him through you. We are offering you full placement in the Witness Protection Program, a new name, a new life, Idaho. Maybe you'll be a librarian, you'll be safe. He slid a pamphlet across the table. Natalia looked at the picture of a smiling, generic family in a sun-drenched suburb. She thought of her tiny, damp apartment. She thought of the book cafe. She thought of the penthouse. I've had a new life before, she said, pushing the pamphlet back. It was called hiding. It was cold, and I was always afraid. You won't be afraid in Idaho, Miss Markovich. You'll be protected. No, Natalia said, standing. She thought of Costa, of the man who had killed for her, the man who was burning his own world down to build a new one with her. I ran once, from Odessa. I won't run again. I'm staying with him. Klein sighed. That's a death sentence. No, she said. It's a choice. When she told Costa, he was silent for a long time. He looked out the penthouse window, at the city he had once owned. Then Natalia Markovich has to die, he said. It was the only way. If she wouldn't take the government's protection, she would take his. The plan was cold and efficient. The FBI, eager to keep their star witness happy, agreed to cooperate. 2 days later, a small encrypted news file was leaked to the underworld. A car, registered to a Moretti-owned shell corporation, had gone off a pier in the industrial district. It had burned, submerged, and was unrecoverable. The passenger, listed on a federal watch list, was Natalia Markovich. The Russians, what was left of them, were satisfied. She was a loose end, now tied. The old families were also satisfied. The woman who had made the boss soft was gone. A week later, the second bomb dropped. Footage, taken from a secure federal facility, was released. It showed Constantine Moretti, clean-shaven in a simple gray shirt, sitting at a table. He was calmly, methodically handing over ledgers, data drives, and photographs to federal agents. He was talking. He was naming names. He was, in the undeniable language of their world, a rat. The betrayal was public, absolute, and final. He was a dead man, walking. There was only one loose end left. Peace was a strange, hollow feeling. Costa had sold the estate. He had sold the penthouse. He and Natalia were living in a small, secure and anonymous apartment downtown, waiting for the federal deal to be finalized. They were ghosts. It's almost over, he said one night. They were standing on the small balcony, the city lights a distant, blurry promise. One more thing, she said. What's that? Midnight Reads, the book cafe. It's still there, boarded up. I know, he said. The bank seized it after Barry left. I want to see it. One last time, she said, before we go. Before we become whoever we are next. He knew it was a risk. He was the most wanted man in the city, by both the law and the lawless. But he looked at her, at the woman who had refused to leave him, and he nodded. The cafe was a skeleton. The windows were covered in plywood. The street was dark, the lamps broken. It was the same decaying neighborhood, untouched by the shining city on the hill. Costa picked the lock. the click sounding loud in the silence. They stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of dust and mildew. Moonlight cut through the cracks in the boards, illuminating the ghost of their first meeting. The empty shelves, the overturned tables. "This is where I first saw you." Costa's voice was a low rumble in the dark. "You were terrified, but you were brave." "I was stupid," she whispered, walking toward the corner where Sashko and Irina used to sit. "You were magnificent." "Costa, don't move." A voice, thick with grief and rage, came from the shadows by the old espresso machine. "He's right. You were stupid. You should have run." Rocco stepped into the moonlight. He looked terrible. He was thin, his eyes wild, and he was holding a pistol. He was shaking. "Rocco," Costa said, his voice calm. He didn't move. He kept his body between the gunman and Natalia. "It's over. Go home." "Home? You took my home," Rocco hissed. "You took it, and you gave it to her. You burned it all down for a whore." "Watch your mouth." Costa's voice was ice. "Or what? You'll call your FBI friends? You'll testify against me?" Rocco laughed, a high, cracking sound. "Marco loved you. He was your brother. He died for you and you. You took his memory, and you threw it in the trash. All for this." He aimed the pistol, his shaking hand centering on Costa's chest. "You're not the boss anymore. Costa, you're just a rat, and I'm the exterminator." Costa was unarmed. He had given up his weapons as part of the deal. He was a dead man. "You're right," Natalia said. Her voice cut through the tension. It was sharp, clear and cold. Rocco's head snapped toward her. His hatred was so profound, his eyes narrowed. You did this. Which? You took him from us." "He's not your boss," Natalia continued, taking a small step to the side, away from Costa. Her eyes were locked on Rocco's. "He's not your brother. He's a man. Marco didn't die for this. This game. He died so Costa could live. He died for a choice." "Shut up," Rocco screamed, his gun wavering, moving from Costa to her. He was unraveling. He had no choice. "You took it. And you are going to undo it?" she pressed, her voice rising, filling the small, dead space. "You're going to be the one to finish the job that the Thierrys couldn't? You'll kill the last man Marco saved? Is that how you honor him?" Rocco was breathing hard, his knuckles white. He was lost. He was looking at her, his face a mask of confusion and fury. He had forgotten Costa. It was only a second. It was all Costa needed. Costa moved. There was no sound. There was only a blur of motion in the dark. He closed the 10-foot gap, his hand clamping onto Rocco's wrist, forcing the gun toward the ceiling. A single shot exploded, the flash and sound deafening, filling the cafe with the smell of gunpowder. Plaster rained down from the ceiling. It was not a fight. It was a dismantling. Costa, the man who had given up his empire, was still Costa. He broke Rocco's wrist. He took the gun. He slammed the younger man against the wall, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Rocco slid to the floor, gasping, defeated, holding his ruined hand. Costa stood over him, holding the pistol, his chest heaving. The old Costa, the boss, would have pulled the trigger. The old Costa would have ended the threat, cleaned the loose end. He looked at the broken man on the floor. He saw not an enemy, but the last tragic victim of the life he had left behind. He ejected the clip. The bullets scattered on the dusty floor. He tossed the empty gun into the shadows. "It's done, Rocco," Costa said, his voice heavy with a final, profound exhaustion. "Go. Leave the city. Don't come back. There's nothing left for you here." He turned, walking to Natalia, who stood, trembling but unharmed. He took her arm, and without looking back, they walked out of the cafe and into the night, leaving the ghosts behind. Peace was not a destination. It was an act of construction. The clubs were sold. The laundries were seized and shut down. The transportation routes were dissolved. Constantine Moretti, the kingpin, was dead. Constantine, the man, was reborn. With the money that was left, the clean, hard-won money from the federal deal, he bought a 3-story brick building in a decent neighborhood. He didn't put his name on it. The sign on the glass door read, "The Markovich Project, Immigration and Advocacy." Inside, it was clean, bright, and busy. Natalia was not a translator. She was the director. She hired lawyers, paralegals, and social workers. She used Costa's resources and her own experience to fight for women who had no one, for families lost in the system, for children who reminded her of Sashko. She gave them what she had never had, a voice and a protector. Months later, on a cold Tuesday evening, she was in the basement of a local community center. The lights were fluorescent, the chairs were plastic, but the room was warm. She stood in front of a whiteboard. On it, she had written in simple, clear letters, My name is Natalia," she said, pointing to herself. Her smile, warm and genuine. She looked at the small class of new refugees, their faces tired but hopeful. "My name is Natalia." They repeated it. From the doorway, a man watched. He was quiet, his hands in the pockets of a simple, dark wool coat. He was clean-shaven. The hard angles of his jaw softened. The dangerous, watchful energy was gone, replaced by a deep, patient calm. He was no longer the boss. He was just a man, waiting for his wife. The class ended. The students gathered their things, smiling, thanking her in a mixture of languages. She gathered her books and walked to the door. Costa smiled, his gray eyes soft, holding none of the ice they once had. She stopped in front of him. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly. It was a kiss of simple, everyday affection, a kiss of coming home. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear, and whispered in Russian, their shared, secret language. "Povezi menya domoy, Mr. Boss. Bring me home, Mr. Boss." He smiled. He took her bag from her shoulder, his hand settling in the small of her back, guiding her out into the cold, clean night air. "Yes, ma'am." Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more content like this. And finally, please share your thoughts in English. I'd love to hear what you think.